Hey everybody, welcome to the Toybox. I'm your host, Andrew M. Today we're going to be taking a look, for the very first time, at a vehicle from my collection, the 2009 Terminator Hunter-Killer. This is part of the Terminator Salvation line, so think what you will about the movie, but I found a lot of the toys were awesome, and were on my fanboy wish list ever since Terminator 2 showed up in 1991. I'd always wanted more of the Skynet killer machines that we saw in those future war bits in the first two Terminator movies. So I was absolutely beside myself when I saw that this thing was released in retail about 10 years ago. The Aerial HK, or Hunter Killer, is a very well-designed toy. Playmates did a really good job with this on all accounts. It does look a bit different than the versions that we're used to from the earlier Terminator films. This is meant to be a more modern take, or a more grounded take, I guess, a little bit less chromy and sci-fi looking, and a little bit more real, and even a little bit more patchwork, giving the idea that in the Terminator universe, Skynet puts these things together, and it really doesn't care how they look, as long as they function. Which is why you can see all along the surface, there's like missing pieces of armor and whatnot, because the human resistance can't really fly above these things to shoot down at them. And on the underside, it's a lot more clean, because they're worried about humans shooting up at them. Obviously, I've got the landing gear out right now, which is a neat feature of this, which I'll get into in a moment. But I found that the detail of the sculpting and molding and the actual design aesthetic, very smart, very intelligent. I'm sure that this is just an adaptation of what they designed for the film. But like I say, leaving opinions about the film aside, the design is really incredible and something that I love. It looks fearsome. And let's get into what this thing can do. First of all, what I love about vehicles from my collection is that they all have features and abilities and whatnot that might not necessarily be like juvenile action features, but they're functional working components and features that I like. So this one actually has landing gear. It has three separate pieces. There's one here in the front, and as you can see, it fits snugly into there once you flip it up. It has these two legs in the back, and the feet are actually sort of articulated chicken legs, and you can just, as you can even hear, they just snap firmly into place, and they fit very snug. It feels like there's a small spring or something in there that makes them snap forward. The forward one is just simply a moving part, plastic moving part, and I just put it in, but there is an indentation in the front so that it snugly gets up and out of the way. It also features the VTOL, or VTOL, thruster capability from a dial on the center of the vehicle. So you can, have it lift off vertically and then slowly take off and go. Just like real-life Harrier jets and other things like that. So that's real technology applied into a futuristic, take, because of course this is meant to be a robot. It is completely a machine. There is no human pilot or human presence. This is controlled by the Skynet master supercomputer that is on a relentless mission to destroy humanity. In terms of armaments, this thing is pretty well armed. It is in scale with small scale, or 3 3/4 inch, approximately 12 to 15 centimeter figures. So that's why it fits in my hand so nicely. It features two cannons in the front, and they do swivel from side to side, both ones. They're both double-barreled. Of course, they're laser blasters. I don't care what Terminator Salvation tells me. These are lasers. And it even has two little rear guns in the back. And they do swivel, but they're a little stiff because they don't get moved a whole lot. I admit, I haven't had a lot of chance to play around with this one as compared to a lot of my other vehicles in my collection. But when it is flying perfectly level, one thing I really like to note is that those cannons, as you can see, are both aiming straight forward and straight back. So it's a tail gun to take out any aircraft that might be trying to intercept it or get in the way, or possibly incoming missiles. Don't forget the human resistance did have technology is sophisticated enough to design Skynet, so the idea that they have guided anti-air missiles is definitely a thing. And speaking of missiles, this thing even features, as I guess the toy-type feature of the vehicle, launching missiles, actual spring-loaded ones. They're on the front. There's little buttons right here on the sides, and they will actually fire these guys. And I'm going to fire them at the camera, because why not? Kaboom! They have pretty good force. They get pretty good distance. They were like that out of the box. They haven't diminished much over the years. When I store my vehicles and figures alike, I actually, with spring-loaded stuff, I'll load it into the launcher as far as I can without actually activating the lock, so they could just slide out. And that's a way to preserve the lifespan of the spring. I actually do that with action features on figures, and I mean, you name it. Anything that I can do to not put as much stress on these things that will eventually give out, and I do have ones that have given out over the years, I do that. And it's not a fault of the designers for including these spring-loaded features and whatnot, because they are terrifically fun. Both as a kid and as an adult. I mean, you can just go to town with target practice and have a lot of fun with it. In terms of paint on this, there actually isn't a lot. It's got some minor shading around some of the open components on the engine ports and whatnot. This is actually, you can see on the back of the turbines, it's actually a separate piece, and it's not glued in. It rotates. So they didn't do a lot of paint on this, but it works, because even if you look at the original designs from the first Terminator movies back in '84 and '91, those robot drones weren't painted. They were just, chrome metal. They were just bright metal, and that was it. There's no markings, and there shouldn't be. There's nothing identifying that tells you that this is Skynet, other than you look at it and you're like, uh-oh, that's a Terminator hunter-killer. And I like that. I like the fact that these are machines that think like machines. They don't have egos. It's a self-aware machine, and because it's self-aware, it knows I don't need to plaster my name all over everything and, stick 18 Cobra or G.I. Joe logos on my aircraft to accomplish my mission. I can just be an aircraft and be an efficient killing machine, and that's all there is to it. There is one other feature of this which is really neat. It's actually an opening compartment that can house a Terminator figure. So this is actually a separate action figure. It's one that's in my collection. It's a little bit hard to get the figure out. I got to tell you that. That is truth. But it was included when the Hunter's Killer was sold, and it doesn't want to come out, because this is why I'm doing this live, to show you how hard these are to get in and out. So there we go. I finally forced it out. There's a compartment here. You can see it goes all the way back to where the dial is inside the HK. The lid flips up. It snaps shut. I've never had a problem with the lid coming open when I don't want it to. I'm shaking this as hard as I can, and that lid's not budging. That snaps in place really good. And so kudos to them on the toy design for that, because that would really suck if you're flying around, trying to shoot at the good guys or whatever, and then suddenly, the lid falls open and your guns are suddenly, useless. And giant vulnerable spot, if you've got a good guy with a spring-loaded missile launcher, he's going to chuck a rocket in there, and that's the end of that. But it did come with this T-700 3¾ inch figure, and he's fully articulated. What I like about this is that you see a lot of figures that are included with vehicles are subpar compared to respective releases in their same lines. And what I mean by that is you'll see that figures that are included with vehicles are almost like an afterthought. They have less articulation, or they have no accessories, or their paint job sucks, or most or all of the above is true. At least with this T-700, they went all out. This is fully on par with the figures that were released with the Salvation line. He's got painted red eyes. He's got the same level of articulation. He's got, legs go up and down, bend at the knee. His torso is one solid piece, so his head doesn't turn, his chest doesn't move, but his shoulders are on ball joints, so they get a good range of motion, and he has a bend at the elbow and even a swivel at the elbow so that he can move his arm thusly, and I really like that. Again, this is a Terminator. This is a machine. He doesn't need to be super articulated, and for a vehicle pack-in, taking that into consideration, I think he makes the mark. They can certainly do better, but a lot of toy companies do a lot worse, and so I actually really like this figure. I've owned it ever since the Terminator Salvation movie was in theaters. I bought these the minute they came out, as well as a couple other figures from the line, which you may have seen in my video tours, simply because I love the endoskeleton Terminator aesthetic. I wish they had released the ground HK, which was prominently featured in the Future War scenes in the first two Terminator movies. Basically a big tank that just looks vicious and menacing and intimidating, and I'd love to be able to own one. I know there are some very expensive high-end model kits you can get of that particular design, but I have no interest in spending that kind of money for something that I'm not going to be able to enjoy with the same level of, I guess, I almost want to say carelessness with these. These are retail releases. They're meant to be played with, and I can really have a lot more fun with these, worry about breaking them, and then, you know, uh-oh, I'm out $200 or $300. Whereas this was $25 when it was first released. For the figure and the HK, they came packaged together. And I think that was worth it then, and I think it's definitely worth it now. And part of me is quite sad that we don't see a lot of, you know, action figure type vehicle releases of this quality anymore. Some of the Star Wars stuff still gets up to this level, but that's really it. I haven't seen anything else that even gets close. And the Star Wars stuff has been, and always has been, very pricey. It's much more expensive than other competing toy lines. So I think that around 2009, 2010 was kind of the last gasp of a lot of these other smaller scale toy lines trying to do something really interesting and offering us vehicles or little play sets, things like that. So that's my look at the HK. This is one of my personal favorites. It's actually in my upstairs collection display room. It's actually on top of that special glass case I have with all of my very favorites. That shows you how much I love this thing and how much of an attachment I've had to these Terminator designs that I've literally grown up with and just thought were so cool and very functional, I got to admit. For, you know, even a science fiction type property, this is very real feeling. It has an element of almost realism to it that I really like, and of course that ties into my love of G.I. Joe and some of their more outlandish stuff. But, you know, I could go on about this thing all day. I won't. But I will say that I hope you guys have enjoyed a look at one of the vehicles from my collection. Admittedly, one of the simpler ones, but I'm kind of glad that that's what came up when I did the random number generation on this, because it's good practice for me to see how I want to do these. Some of the vehicles that I may want to spotlight, I'm going to have to come up with a different camera setup because they are not this small, nor are they this simple. But I think in terms of giving you an idea about what some of the vehicles from my collection are like, and what I mean when I talk about vehicles from my collection, I do mean a separate piece big enough to fit a figure and transport it. Maybe it isn't even designed to do that in a similar way to this, where this literally just drops a Terminator endoskeleton on the ground to, you know, do some follow-up work if it can't target from the air, which is, I imagine, what the intention of that opening compartment would be from Skynet's strategic point of view, which is a very logical conclusion. If I can't shoot it from the air, if it's hidden under something, I'm going to send something down on the ground to go hunt it out. That's real military tactics, and that makes a lot of sense. So there's my review of the 2009 Playmates Terminator Salvation Hunter Killer. Very vicious sounding name for a very vicious looking vehicle. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, everybody, I'll see you out there in Toyland.